Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we continue our coverage of Clone Wars history with the third year of the war. Now, before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe and notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of this series. In our last episode, we took a look at the reemergence of slavery in the outer rims of the galaxy due to a lack of control by the Republic. Today we'll be taking a look at a few back-channel attempts by Republic and Separatist officials to create peace negotiations that end the war. Chapter 9. Republic-Separatist Peace Talks. Now, to begin today's episode, we have to go back before the Clone Wars and the Separatist crisis even started. Although it's called the Clone Wars, this galaxy-wide conflict was actually a civil war, one fought by planets and people that were at one time working together. And while the war quickly escalated and grew out of control, there were still plenty of reasonable people on both sides. Individuals found themselves all of a sudden facing off against friends, colleagues, and even family members who were now supposedly their sworn enemy. In 21 BBY, the second year of the Clone Wars, Senator Padme Amidala goes on a secret mission to the Separatist capital planet of Araxis. The senator was concerned that a new bill, which had just entered the Senate, would continue to escalate the war beyond either side's control. This bill, the Republic Financial Reform Bill, would allow the central government to open new lines of credit with the intergalactic banking clans. In return, the banks would enjoy further deregulation on their industry. Remember, the Galactic Republic, unlike central governments here on Earth, did not have a central bank or some type of federal reserve. This limited the Republic's ability to continue funding their ever-growing army. The majority of the Republic Senate was more than willing to surrender more power to the executive branch so that a quick and swift end of the war could be achieved. The Separatist droid army had blindsided the Republic, and more troubling, seemed to be quite capable in the field, and also their larger numbers put the Republic on the defensive. Every world that the Galactic Republic lost or was unable to protect further degraded the legitimacy of the central government. And this led to an erosion of trust by colonies and planets in the Outer Rim that were currently under contention. A small minority of senators like Padme Amidala, Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, and Anaconda Farr opposed the Republic's financial reform bill, fearing that the Republic would continue down a path of financial insolvency or further escalate the war. The Republic Senate was extremely corrupt. You also had representatives from the Trade Federation, Techno Union, and intergalactic banking clans who were pushing heavily for this bill. This is because their related industries would benefit greatly from a new order of clones, vehicles, ships, and weapons. These factions were also unofficially supporting the Separatist alliance and playing both sides of the conflict. They were war profiteers, and three of the representatives, Lot Dodd, Gume Sam, and Nix Card, even came up with a plan to convince their contacts within the CIS to launch an attack on Coruscant to levy more support for the military funding bill. Now, backchanneling or unofficial discussion is commonly done by politicians within the same faction. But in the middle of a war, backchanneling with your enemy took a certain amount of courage and preparation. Things can go south pretty quickly. Your own faction might accuse you of treason, especially if your mission is not sanctioned by your government, and the enemy government might just arrest you and accuse you of being a spy if you're found. Although Padme expects no trouble during her mission, it's never a bad idea to bring a Jedi along, especially someone as young and unassuming as Ahsoka Tano. Padme's contact with the Separatist Alliance was Mina Buntori. She was a former mentor of Padme when they both had served in the Senate together before the war. She lived in the capital city of Raxulon on Araxis and was the leader of the Peace faction within the Separatist Parliament. Her faction was more open to compromise and wished to bring an end to the fighting. The Peace faction in the Separatist Parliament was actually quite similar to Padme's own cohorts, who also wanted to oppose the war on moral grounds. Some members of the Peace faction were ideologically opposed to the wartime executive powers granted to Count Dooku, which mirrors Supreme Chancellor Palpatine's own increase in power. Other members of the Peace faction were against the newly levied war taxes that Count Dooku had created, whereas others feared that the war would do irreparable damage to the galactic shipping network and supply chains that took centuries to create. Most Separatist Alliance worlds were raw material or heavy industry focused and depended on the population centers in the middle of the galaxy to consume all of their exports. Ahsoka, using her Jedi contacts, manages to successfully sneak Padme and her onto the Separatist capital planet, Araxis. Member of Parliament Bonteri intercepts the two before they reach security. Ahsoka, who like many young people saw the world as black and white, was upset by Padme's connection to the supposed enemy. But Bonteri proved to be a graceful host and introduces the two to her son, Lux Bonteri. Now, the Bonteris have every reason to hate the Republic. Just last year, Mina Bonteri's husband was killed by clone troopers while he was defending a Separatist base on Arraganor. But the Bonteris were intelligent enough to be able to separate the individual from the faction they belonged to. Padme makes a pretty big gamble in telling Bonteri about the Senate's new military funding bill. Such discussions could be considered treason in wartime. But she uses this knowledge as leverage to push Bonteri to see the urgency of the situation. Padme requests that Bonteri put on the Separatist Parliament floor a motion to reopen negotiation channels and peace talks with the Republic. Now, Padme cannot guarantee that the Republic will accept these peace negotiations, and she's definitely not here on behalf of Chancellor Palpatine, but this is basically her best option. The vote for peace negotiations isn't a very radical idea and ends up passing in the Separatist Parliament with an easy majority. The peace faction goes with Bonteri, as does the independence faction. Only the war faction, led by the Corporate Alliance, opposes the idea. Count Dooku presides over the vote. His public figure at least remains impartial to the vote, promising to preserve democracy. But in secret, he contacts Republic senators with business interests in continuing the war and confirms that a quick attack on Coruscant will quickly derail the entire process. This is sadly a pretty common tactic we see even in our own world. In 2010, peace talks between the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority began. Later that year, an opposition faction to the Palestinian Authority known as Hamas, along with 12 other militant groups, carried out a campaign of attacks targeting innocent Israeli civilians. This attack was not intended to weaken Israel, but specifically target the peace talks between the two sides and derail it, which would also delegitimize the Palestinian Authority, which was mainly run by the Fatah faction, which was opposed to Hamas. It's unfortunately a recurring theme in that specific conflict. The Palestinian Authority never seems to have complete control over the Palestinian people, which prevents any type of long-term solution from being created. This also increases the power of more hardline Israeli political factions who are less likely to give any concessions to the Palestinians at all. This is one of the many important lessons that Star Wars can teach us about the real world. Now, we should always be wary of our enemies in a conflict, but we also have to look at individuals within our own faction who seek to sabotage any efforts towards peace and reconciliation. At the same time, we might also be lucky enough to find a way to contact like-minded individuals in the enemy faction. Anyway, Count Dooku sends General Grievous to attack the Coruscant power grid with disguised battle droids. This creates a huge power failure in the Senate district right before the Republic Senate can vote on how they want to respond to the Separatist proposal for peace. This not only delays the vote, it also changes public opinion against peace, and more support is gained for deregulating the banks and increasing funding for the Grand Army of the Republic. In a retaliatory attack, the Galactic Republic kills several civilian citizens, including Member of Parliament Mina Bonteri, although it's later found out that she was actually killed by one of Dooku's own agents. A year later in 20 BBY, another peace conference is held on the neutral world of Mandalore. This time, delegates from both the Republic Senate and the Separatist Parliament meet in person to discuss the possibility of peace. Padme Amidala, Mon Mothma, and Bail Organa represent the Republic at the meeting, but facing them is Senator Vo Attel of the Corporate Alliance, leader of the war faction. Mina Bonteri's presence is sorely missing from this meeting. Vo Attel demands that the Republic representatives recognize the legitimacy of the Separatist Alliance on behalf of their Chancellor, which of course is a non-starter. Newly elected junior Senator Lux Bonteri storms into the negotiations and declares his continued loyalty to the Separatist Alliance, but at the same time accuses Count Dooku of treason and ordering the murder of his mother. The Separatist representatives immediately have Bonteri arrested and taken away, but the Republic representatives are worried about what will happen to him. Remember, Padme is good friends with his mother, and Ahsoka seems to have developed some feelings for the younger Bonteri. And so Ahsoka extracts Lux from the Separatists before he's executed, causing a small skirmish to break out between the Separatist droids and Republic Senate guards, which of course derails the entire peace talk. Ahsoka takes Lux aboard her ship, and they're set to travel to Coruscant, where he will be granted amnesty to the Republic. But before they even begin their trip, Lux stuns Ahsoka and knocks her out. He has his own plans to meet with the notorious Mandalorian group known as Death Watch. They had recently been unsuccessful in carrying out an uprising against the Duchess of Mandalore, and now they were camped on the planet of Karlak, where they continued to gather resources and train their members for another attempt to seize Mandalore. Lux wants to hire this group of talented fighters to kill his sworn enemy, Count Dooku, but soon he finds out just how treacherous the Death Watch can be, especially when they find out his friend Ahsoka happens to be a Jedi, their sworn enemy. So, as you can see, there's considerable support for peace talks on both the Separatist Alliance side and also on the Galactic Republic side, but there are also shadowy factions that benefit and profit from the continuation of the war. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.